I think there's three things World War III will be fought over, and it'll be horrific. I think starvation will be the biggest killer in World War III.
The Middle East remains on edge. Global energy markets are under pressure. China, Russia, and the United States are all testing the limits of the international system. And increasingly, crises that once seemed separate are now beginning to merge into one strategic picture. Or as I like to say, World War E, where E stands for energy. Hello, everyone. I'm John Bruni, and welcome to the Focus Podcast. Joining me today is returning guest Professor Roy Casagranda, all the way from Dubai. Roy, are we in World War E?
Yeah, very possibly. It's hard to know exactly when it will start or how it starts, but there's certainly indicators. World War II is also an energy war. Um, I mean, it started for energy. It was fought with energy in mind, and it ended in part because of energy. Um, World War One was you could see like the hints of it, but it ended up being Germany ran out of food. That's why Germany surrendered. But so World War Two is our first energy war for sure. I think the other thing that's on the table is fresh water. Uh, and they're tied together in the Middle East because desalination plants create the fresh water, and
Yep.
so there's a little bit of a feedback loop. But Iran, the largest river in central Iran, I can't remember its name, Zayand something Rud, Zayand Rud, I think is his
The
name.
big river in central Iran.
It stopped
Yeah,
flowing in 2006. Like we
yeah,
we are
yeah.
witnessing global warming, whether anybody believes it or not. And
Mm,
you know, there are serious consequences. Last year, Tehran ran out of water. A few years ago,
mm.
Cape Town, South Africa, ran out of water. We,
Correct.
yeah, I really think, and then of course, food is always going to be an issue. The fact that it played such a big role in World War One hasn't changed. I mean,
Mm,
if we do something that looks like a real world war, that's the first thing that'll go down. Is food. When you think about it, right? The whole world is totally interactive. If I go to the grocery store here and buy beef, I'm buying Australian or New Zealand beef.
yep.
You can also buy Brazilian beef, but I don't. I buy the Aussie and Kiwi beef.
Good
But
on you, mate.
yeah, but I mean, when you think about it, if something like a world war breaks out, UAE doesn't have beef. I mean, there is
Yeah.
in Fujairah, they're working on actually breeding a cow a bovine that can survive in this climate and do really well and produce good meat and milk. But they might still be a few generations away from doing that. But even if they are, they still have to feed it, and you can't feed
Mm,
it on sand. And so,
mm.
like the whole world is completely integrated when it comes to food and food consumption. And and so I think there's three things World War III will be fought over, and it'll be horrific. I think starvation will be the biggest killer in World War III.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with you on that one. Okay, so Roy, let's try to break this down for our audience because there are a number of pillars that undergird this weird international structure that we're currently seeing. So let's start
Yeah.
with where you are in the Middle East, shall we? Okay, Roy, it appears President Trump is attempting to achieve three objectives in the Middle East: prevent a wider Middle East war, keep negotiations with Iran alive, and maintain support for Israel's security objectives. But recent Israeli strikes against Hezbollah targets in Lebanon have placed enormous pressure on those diplomatic efforts. So, can Trump realistically balance all three objectives, or are we reaching a point where these goals become fundamentally incompatible?
Yeah, we also have to reopen the strait that Trump has effectively closed.
Correct.
Um, so there's a lot of moving parts here. The United States has attacked Iran three times in the last 3 days.
Mm,
I think I was looking at the news and there was a news article at 3:30 my time about U.S. striking targets in Iran, and Iran has hit Kuwait the first 2 days in retaliation, and Bahrain is the latest target. Um, I- Israel, of course, is just smashing the living hell out of South Lebanon, right? It's insane. Israel has restarted operations in Gaza. So if this is a ceasefire, I'd hate to see what war looks like. This is a really crappy ceasefire. And so, the news keeps saying, ceasefire, and they keep putting air quotes around it or just whatever this is. I don't know how they're going to negotiate out of this because Iran has all the cards. As long as Iran keeps the Strait of Hormuz closed, there's nothing the United States can do. I mean, short of a ground invasion and trying to just physically take control of Iran. But when you remember that Iran is 3 times the size of Iraq, Iraq was flat, Iran has mountains, that Iran has been preparing for this moment for over 4 decades, that they have a massive industry, and some of that industry is underground and in caves. There's no realistic ground war option on the table. And when you think about it, that was the United States' big threat was, if you're a third world country and you have a resource we want, we'll Iraq you, we'll Vietnam you.
Hmm. Yeah.
And and so it incentivized countries to cooperate, like Venezuela did. But at the end of the day, that threat doesn't hold up in Iran. So I don't even know I don't even know where to go. One of the things that I think we need to remember, we spent a lot of time bashing Trump, but I just want to point out he is a genius because
A very
um,
stable genius, I hear.
a very stable deal. Yes. I mean, his professor, his uncle was a professor at MIT. Uh,
Exactly.
exactly. Who thought nuclear was going to be a big deal when nobody thought it was, which is weird because I'm pretty sure everybody always thought it was. But so in January, which feels like years ago, but it was really just a few months ago.
Okay.
In January, Iran was ruled by an 86-year-old man with metastasized cancer who probably had months, but maybe weeks, maybe days left before he was out. The government was in 4 separate factions, backing 4 different people to replace him. One of those factions doing Mujtaba, his son, but there were 3 other factions in play. There was, at minimum, when Khamenei died, there was going to be a power struggle, possibly a civil war. It's unclear. In January, Iran had been hit by one of its biggest revolts by its people. Its economy was completely collapsed. It's in a depression with worthless currency, runaway inflation. Iran was finished by any standard. Somehow, through Trump's pure raw genius, he brought Iran back and made it a regional power and has put it in a position where it has a stable government with broad support from the public. Not many people could do that. I think Trump might be the greatest leader in Iranian history since the Safavids.
That's a big call. I'd say he was a reverse genius, that he didn't set out to do much of anything, that it just all happened, and through the one action, and that is, I'm going to get Iran. I'm going to bomb Iran. And so he did. And that's how it happened. And everything that happened from there was just a natural consequence of the Iranians always knowing that there was going to be an option where the Americans will go in full force. And they needed to do no more than survive. That's all they needed to
Yeah,
do. And that's
that was
exactly
their
what they've
goal.
done. Now tell me
And
something.
survive and shut down the global economy.
Oh, well,
Shutting
that's
down the whole
right.
Strait of Hormuz is just disaster. It's a
Ex
catastrophe.
Exactly, and there is that, but then there's also something else, and I don't think that Trump really quite understood what he walked himself into here, because with the victory that Iran has now gotten over both the United States and the broader international community over their capture and holding of the Strait of Hormuz, there's this other thing that's just come out recently. This little telephone call that Donald Trump had made to Bibi Netanyahu, where apparently it didn't go too well. You know, Trump was swearing and cussing and calling Bibi everything under the sun, which, to those people who aren't Bibi followers or fans, is probably neither here nor there. But the fact of the matter is, it's not altering Bibi's behavior. I can't see how it does. But from an Iranian perspective, this is pure gold. They have
It's
now just
gold.
split. They've split the two allies that are attacking them. You know the
Yeah.
one of Sun Tzu's. I'm sure it was Sun Tzu. It could have been some other strategist. I'll paraphrase, say something along the lines of, well, the most important thing you need to do is you need to be able to split your enemies and prevent them from forming a united front. Well, the Iranians not only have got the world by the short and curlies over Hormuz, they've split Washington from Jerusalem, which then creates a different set of headaches for everybody concerned, right?
It does. I
No.
have to just read what the Axios thing did,
Mm.
what the Axios reported. So
Mm.
I'll leave out the F bomb and just say F because
Okay.
I don't know if you want to censor it or not. But I cuss like a drunken pirate, but I try not to when I'm on the air. So uh,
That's okay. You're in good
okay,
company.
what the F are you doing? And then Trump went on to say, "You're effing crazy. You'd be in prison if it weren't for me. I'm saving your ass. Everybody hates you now. Everybody hates Israel because of this."
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that's
What?
pretty strong words. But my question then is that once he gets hit over the head. Now, I was watching something on YouTube this morning suggesting that Bibi was embarrassed by this incident, this blowout with Trump,
Israel's denying
and
it happened.
well, oh, well, that's how embarrassed they actually are about the whole thing. No, it never happened. It never happened. But the fact of the matter is, does this put real and genuine pressure on the U.S.-Israel relationship? Which is, I mean, I don't want to make a big deal about this, but of all of America's allies, the one ally that is America's only ally that it would defend under almost any circumstance is Israel. It's not Australia, it's not the UK, it's not Europe, anyone in Europe for that matter. It certainly ain't Canada, because of course America will, under Trump, invade Canada at some point.
Yeah.
So in actual fact, I mean, if this fundamental relationship, and the Israelis have invested so much sweat and tears in building APEC, the Israeli lobby group, up into a real powerhouse in
Yeah.
DC. Does this throw all of that under the bus, or is this something that, yeah, the Israelis will just fob this whole thing off? Netanyahu will have a chuckle and then carry on regardless, because really he's got his forces in southern Lebanon. He's got his aircraft flying over into Beirut and launching strikes whenever he likes. Is there a check and a balance that can come from Donald Trump on Bibi Netanyahu? I don't see it. Maybe you can.
If I were the Israelis right now, I would be peeing myself. And here's why.
Yeah.
If you were to roll the clock back just 10 years, it's 2016. Obama's president. Everybody thinks Clinton's going to be the next president. And you walk up to a random person on the street, anywhere on the planet. It doesn't have to be in the United States or Europe, anywhere on the planet, and said, in the event that the Russians attack and invade any NATO state, will the United States go to its aid? Everybody would have said, yeah, of course. That's just
Yeah.
built into the system.
Yeah.
If somebody invaded Australia, would the United States go to its aid? Yeah, of course. The United States went to the aid of Kuwait. Like if somebody attacked UAE or Saudi Arabia, would the United States go to its? Yes, nobody would have thought twice about it.
Mm.
Now, we're pretty sure the United States wouldn't do anything for anybody. We're
Mm.
in the GCC, we're 100% certain the United States didn't lift a finger to stop any Iranian missiles or drones from striking any of the six GCC states. The
Mhm.
countries who came to our aid, interestingly enough, were France, Great Britain, and I don't know the role Australia played, but Australia sent stuff. And
Yeah, small role.
yes, but it was noticed.
Yes.
And Egypt. Egypt
Mm.
sent stuff a little
Mm.
late, but it still sent
Mm.
stuff. So the countries that stepped up to the plate, in varying degrees, the French were all over. Like we saw the Sol Rafale flying over our heads. We could hear it on a regular basis. Like the French
Yeah.
really defended UAE. The countries that
Mm-mm.
stepped up, the United States didn't lift a finger. The
Mm.
United States triggered a war that caused the six GCC states to get pulverized and did nothing to stop it. It was insanity. And
Mm.
and so, at the end of the day, I think what Trump has made clear is that he doesn't care about what U.S. foreign policy is. He doesn't care what the United States has built since World War II. He doesn't care about the empire. The only thing that he cares about is his ego.
Mm.
And so if he hates Israel now, he hates Israel now, and they're in the same boat as Germany and Poland and Canada and the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And and I they must be thinking that right now because I mean the history of the last 10 years has proven that this is how this works. Do not piss this man off. He will turn on you like a rabid dog.
Mm.
And and I think that's what's happened. I think Bibi has pissed him off, but also, and this is, I think, something really important, he'll never take the blame for anything.
No,
He's
of course not.
looking for someone to blame.
Yeah.
I think he's discovered Bibi is his target. He's going to blame
Mm.
everything that's gone wrong on Netanyahu, and he'll spin it. I mean, Rubio has already said this. The White House pushed back against it when Rubio said this. This is weeks ago, but Rubio
Mm.
said we only jumped into the war because Israel was going to do it, and we wanted to make sure that we could kind of manage the war. And the only way to do
Mhm.
that was become a participant. The White House backed off on that, but I can see them bringing that narrative back and saying, "Yeah, this is a disaster. We never wanted to do this. This is
Yeah.
all Israel." And if you're Israel, you've got three allies, UK, Germany, and United States, maybe. And
Mhm.
so losing the United States is pretty catastrophic. I would be
But what does
nervous.
what does that, well, it could be nervous, but what does that actually mean for Israeli security? Because in spite of the political rhetoric and the invective and things flying around the place, one side of the room to the other, the one thing that I find difficult as a concept is for even Donald Trump to say to Bibi, if you don't pull out of southern Lebanon, you'll get no more precision guided weapons from us. I mean, that would be the equivalent of America throwing a nuclear bomb at the state of Israel from a political and strategic perspective. I can't see that happen. I think that there are these red lines that will keep the relationship going, but that doesn't mean that the relationship at the political level keeps going nicely. I think that at that sort of substrata where state and state have these very strong bonds, they must continue. Surely. Surely? I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. If you were telling me, like let's say Obama had gotten mad at Israel
Yeah.
and that there had been an open public rift, I would completely agree with you that yeah, there's going to
Mm.
be this surface thing and they're going to be
Mm.
annoyed with each other, but on underneath they're going to just keep things status quo.
Yeah,
With
yeah.
Trump, he tears everything up. He
Mm.
doesn't care.
Mm.
And as soon as his ego is involved, because right, he's built this delusional reality around himself, and anything that contradicts it, he wants to destroy it. He can't stand it. It drives him bonkers. So, so
Mm.
if Israel is now in his crosshairs, if I were an Israeli, I would be freaking out. I can
Mm.
totally see it. He did this with Ukraine, right? He stopped sending missiles to Ukraine. Obviously, Ukraine and Israel aren't on the same level, but when you think about it, Ukraine's in a desperate life and death fight. And
Mm.
so to play these kind of ego games with Ukraine in that moment is really a terrible thing to do.
Mm.
And I think that's who he is. I think he's the kind of guy he's a narcissist who doesn't believe that any other human life has any value. And
Mm.
he cannot be loyal to anybody. He's only loyal to himself. So yeah, I'd be very worried if I was Israel. Again, it's if we were talking about past presidencies, I wouldn't. But this guy, who knows? Who knows what he's
Mm.
going to do next? And Israel is completely dependent on the United States for financial support. If the United States cut off economic aid to Israel, Israel would collapse. It can't sustain a war like this. It's fighting on three fronts. It's four fronts. It's in Syria, it's in Lebanon, it's ramping up in the West Bank, and it's ramping up in Gaza. And then they're doing this war with Iran. Like it's insane. How can a tiny little state with 6 million people do this? It doesn't have the economic ability to do this alone.
Roy, we'll dig a little deeper into the Israel conundrum, but I've got to return to something which strikes me as peculiar, odd. I don't know, everything strikes me as peculiar and odd these days. But another victory that Tehran's managed to pull off is that they've just announced that any continued negotiations toward a deal to open up the Strait of Hormuz cannot involve Hezbollah, effectively casting a protective pall over that non-state group operating in southern Lebanon.
Yeah.
And, that's something that I would have expected from, say, for instance, a country like the United States or maybe a European country with a smaller partner. But I wasn't expecting a fourth-rate power like Iran to cast its protective pall over a non-state actor group, which is obviously a very important ally for it in the region. Because, again, if you go by the Trump idea of power, Iran has no cards. And really,
Yeah.
does it have cards? Well, it obviously does because you know what? If they walk from the negotiated settlement because say Trump changes his mind overnight and says to Bibi, "Okay, sorry about the phone call, pal, but you can do what you like in southern Lebanon. I really hate these Iranians. They're really giving these shits." Um, and that then reveals Hezbollah as being vulnerable to Israeli airstrikes yet again. What is the next step? What will Iran then do to protect its proxy Hezbollah? Because again, we're only one really crazy decision away from a wider conflict here, right?
Yeah. One mistake, and this thing escalates in a way that the world isn't prepared for.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, your question is really, really complicated because there's so many moving parts. But one of
Mm.
the things that's insane is that Iran does believe it is in such a powerful position that instead of desperately fighting for its existence, it's like, oh yeah, southern Lebanon, that's still ours. Hezbollah is
Mm.
still our baby. You can't mess
Mm.
with it. And that just shows you how badly the United States has been beaten diplomatically and militarily, right?
Mm.
There's no doubt that the United States pulverized the Iranian military, destroyed Iranian asset after asset after asset, and it has done nothing to hurt Iran politically.
Mm.
And that's insane. It shouldn't be the case. When the
Yep.
war
Yep.
started, I had this much hope that this government, the Iranian government, would topple. I
Mm.
did. It was a small amount because I don't have any faith in Trump. I don't think he's smart enough to figure something out. But I still was holding out hope, like, oh my God, this could be. And instead, it's gone the exact opposite direction.
Mm.
Iran knows that losing Hezbollah would be catastrophic for it on the other side. It needs to hold on to this, but at the same time, it shouldn't be in a position where it can negotiate strongly
Mm.
and protect Hezbollah. And in the meantime, the United States is doing really weird, irrational things. So the United States also has a blockade over the Strait of
Yeah.
Hormuz, and
Mm.
just today shot a missile into a Botswana flagged ship, which A makes me ask the question, how does a landlocked country have a ship? And then B, why are you shooting at Botswanan ships? Like, shouldn't you be
Yeah.
shooting at Iranian ships? I don't
Yeah.
understand. How did Botswana get into this conflict?
This
And
this conflict is spreading beyond the borders that we understand. It really
poor
is. But
Botswana.
I mean, yeah, I know. It's a harmless little country and a nice one too, by all accounts. But
Yeah, I only
you
have
know,
positive thoughts about Botswana. Like my stereotype is that it's a really wonderful place.
well, look, now we've broached Israel as a topic. Let's go a little bit deeper. So you've said, and you're quite right, that Israel has now been engaged in near continuous conflict, or let's take the conflict word out, war, since October 7, 2023. Um, it's been involved in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, and now with the war in Iran. And we can't forget that it's lobbed a couple of bombs at Yemen as well. Israel remains a relatively small country with around, well, you said 6 million. I've got 10 million in my factoid, but I'm probably
Oh,
using the
you're
whole
counting
population.
Palestinians?
Well, I'm very generous like that. But say the full mobilized population of 10 million, just let's be generous here. But the country relies heavily upon, the mobilization of its reserve forces. How much sustained conflict can Israeli society realistically absorb?
At some point, the people are going to become psychologically exhausted.
Mm.
That's what actually happened to South Africa. Apartheid South Africa did the famous border wars. They lasted 20 plus years, and it wore the apartheid state down. They were effectively at war with Namibia, Angola, Zambia, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe all at the same time,
Yeah.
and and they had the ANC operating within them, working against them, and it eventually forced them to go to the negotiating tables. When you really think about it, Israel has basically been in a permanent state of war since '67, and periodically in a state of war prior to that, because right, its very
Mm,
foundation was a massive land grab. So I think you could pull the clock back and say it's even before 2023.
mm,
Israel is capable of doing this because of all the money the United States, Germany, and Great Britain send and all the weapons they send. Like if you have an alcoholic father and you keep buying them alcohol, you're enabling them, and that's basically what those three countries have become. They've become genocide enablers. And if you could just somehow get them to stop, it would force the Israelis to the peace tables. They would have to negotiate out a deal because it's just what they're doing is completely unsustainable. I've seen reports, and I'm not completely sure how reliable they are, but that actually several hundred thousand Israelis have permanently left Israel, and
mm,
they've moved to Europe or the United States because they're just done with the project.
mm,
And you can't afford when you're that small, you can't afford to hemorrhage that large population like that. The tragedy is most of the people who left are the moderate folk. They're the people who were, on the fence about what Israel was doing and whether it was right or not. So they were the one group of people I would have wanted to stay and let the
mm.
fanatics go. Um,
Yeah. Maybe to
so the
Botswana, a nice peaceful place in Africa right here.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. I want to go to Botswana.
Oh, so do I.
Um, yeah, let's do a trip together.
Good.
We'll do a podcast episode from
Oh,
Botswana.
wouldn't that be awesome? What's the capital of
That would be
Botswana?
amazing.
It
What was
would.
that?
What's the capital of Botswana?
Gabon? Oh, geez, you got
Uh,
me.
I'm going to have to chat
Uh,
GPT that one. Yeah, no, I haven't got it. But anyway, yes, yes, yes. That sounds like a brilliant idea. Let's put that down in the to-do box. Yeah. Um,
yes,
so I'm wondering though, Roy, does net
Gaborone.
Gaborone?
I was close when I said Gabore.
Well
Gaborone.
done, you. I would never have gotten anywhere close to that. Okay, so Roy, does Netanyahu know the damage he's actually doing to his country, or is he, like Trump, pretty oblivious to anything other than himself, his desires for what he thinks Israel should be?
Yeah, I don't know. So from the surface, it looks like Israel, a lot of the rhetoric coming from the extreme far right and from the Netanyahu government, Israel's, and then throw in Mike Huckabee, Israel keeps talking
Mm-mm.
about the empire. And
Yeah.
right, they want to own everything from the Nile to the Euphrates, which of course means they would own Cairo.
Mm.
Like it's a little
Sure,
awkward.
the
They would own
Egyptians are fine with that.
Damascus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like this is a really big chunk of land that, I think there's 7 million Jewish Israelis. So it's something around that. That's a lot
Mm-mm.
of land for a tiny, tiny population of people. And I'm assuming they would enslave the Arab population because I don't know I mean, I'm sure they'd genocide as much as they could and then enslave the rest. Like
Mm.
what Hitler planned to do with Ukraine and Poland.
Mm.
So that level of rhetoric and the stuff that's coming out of their mouths, there was recently a protest in Israel where they were shouting, "Death to Arabs, death to Arabs." That level of conversation that's coming out of that government and the extreme far right makes me think that they do believe that they've drunk their own Kool-Aid and they've fallen into this. Netanyahu as an individual strikes me as just smart enough and just cynical enough that he might know he's causing damage to Israel
Mm.
and he doesn't care. I could totally believe that, but I don't really know.
Mm.
I think members of his government are oblivious and they think that they're doing some kind of holy war, right? Because they're, as Zionists, they're theocrats and they're no
Mm.
different than ISIL or Al Qaeda.
A thought just occurred to me, and that is, does does Bibi Netanyahu have any real control over his political destiny within Israel? I mean, he struck me as a very pragmatic figure. I mean, hawkish to be sure, militarist, absolutely, but very pragmatic in terms of his politics in his early career. And then all of a sudden he got into bed with these right-wing loons who believe in
Yeah.
the end of times, who believe in, all kinds of weird and perplexing stuff. And I'm wondering whether he's now created a noose around his own neck because he can't walk away from these guys. These guys are holding his government up, basically. Without them, there is no Prime Minister Netanyahu anymore. And Netanyahu has got his legal traumas that because of October 7, serendipity being as it is, he doesn't have to worry about facing court because he's now the wartime leader of Israel. But his core supporters are all of these whack jobs. And if he was, or at least if he still has, a core of pragmatism in his shriveled black heart, I'm kind of thinking, he must be freaking out now because it's like he has no exit strategy. He's got to go all in or it's all over and it'll be all over very
Yeah.
quickly, right?
I think if he loses office, he goes to prison. So in
Yeah.
his mind, he has to somehow stay in office. If you look at every Israeli election right before, without fail, there's an attack on Gaza. That's been the way it's been at least since 2000. Just there's an Israeli election coming up, Israel attacks Gaza. Israeli election comes up, Israel attacks Gaza. And it's because the government thinks, and it's been mostly proven, that as long as Israel's in a state of war, the Israeli people will back the government. You know, James Madison, the fourth president of the United States, did that.
Mm.
He was worried he was going to lose the 1812 election. So in October, 1 month before the election, he went to Congress and asked for a declaration of war on Great Britain and triggered the War of 1812, where the United States was just absolutely pulverized and crushed. But he
Mm.
won re-election.
Nice guy.
So he wrote the Constitution. It's no big deal.
Mm.
And the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
He was the chief architect for the United States, but it turned out he had a cynical side to him. And I
Mm.
think the lesson of history is if you want to get reelected, one way to do it is just start a war. It doesn't always work because there's always the possibility you'll blow up the global economy.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so I think Bibi's strategy with Iran was I'm going to keep Israel in a state of war against Iran, and then that'll keep me in office.
Mm, mm, mm. Okay, okay, okay. So we've spoken about BB's, political problems from a party political perspective in the Knesset. But then there's also this growing debate surrounding ultra-Orthodox military exemptions. Now,
Yeah.
Roy, is this becoming a genuine national fault line here? How's this playing out, as far as you know?
I mean, Orthodox Jews have been exempt from mandatory service in the IDF. And one of the ways that we could measure the pressure on Israel, because you asked the question, like, can they sustain this, is the
Mm,
fact that Israel wants to repeal that exemption and bring those guys into the IDF. And it's caused protests. There's been
mm,
multiple rather rough protests, in fact. One of the interesting things is there's a whole segment of Orthodox Jews who are living in Israel who don't refer to it Israel. They call it Palestine, and they'll wave Palestinian flags, and they'll go to pro-Palestine demonstrations, and I think that's sort of this fascinating tension. It's to the point where the IDF will show up and try and bring down the Palestinian flags that these guys have raised up.
mm,
So there's this constant sort of frustration and tension between the multiple different Jewish communities in Israel, and the fact that Netanyahu is using this right now, or is pushing this, that his government is pushing this, shows me that
mm,
they're exhausted and they need new blood. They need fresh blood.
mm.
Because it's been foundational since the beginning that they don't have to serve. Like this is
Yeah.
this is a really big move, a big change for them.
Mm,
But other than that, I don't know what it means. I think it's a an indicator of exhaustion.
Roy, let's look at the broader economic impacts of the energy crisis that we're currently going through. Are we now
Okay.
entering a fundamentally different energy era?
I mean, one of the interesting things is one of the countries that'll be the least affected by this is the People's Republic of China. And the reason is the PRC has dumped so much money into renewables. So, this is hurting China for sure. I don't want to say it's not hurting the Chinese. It's just that the impact that they're going to absorb will be greatly diminished because of their investments in renewable energy. Taking so it's 20%. I finally pinned down what I think the numbers are. Is 20% of the world's energy comes from the Persian Gulf. It's 30% of the world's petroleum, but 20% of the total energy production. That the question I have to ask is, this crisis started February 28. We're in June now. So three full months plus a few days. So we're a quarter of the way in. Can we really afford to lose 5% of this year's annual energy supply? And that's if the war
Yeah.
stops right now. If the war goes all the way to the end of the year and then into next year and we lose a whole year, that's 20%. That's huge. It's not going to increase the price of energy by 20%. It'll double, triple, quadruple the price because people are going to have to compete then against each other as customers for the limited amount of energy. And of course, the third world will be in the worst position because they'll have the least ability to compete, but they're also less reliant on energy. So there's kind of a weird effect. China and the third world will be probably less impacted by this crisis. Europe, Australia, the United States, the GCC, they're going to be the most impacted by this.
Mm.
Having said that, the other issue is fertilizer. And I actually
Yep.
think fertilizer is an even bigger deal. You were probably going to ask
Mm.
that question anyway.
Mm, mm.
30% of the world's fertilizer comes from the Persian Gulf.
Yep.
And the estimates now are that fertilizer prices have gone up by 5 times. And we're starting to see evidence that farmers across the world have cut their usage of fertilizer in half. And the estimate is that cutting fertilizer use in half will take out 15% of the calories produced.
Wow.
So my question then is, did we have 15% extra? So if you look at
Mm.
the food waste in a country like the United States, there might be a little bit of slack. Is the United States going to change its culture to do a little bit less food waste? And the answer is, of course not. Why?
Yeah. Exactly.
The only
Exactly.
the only thing that will motivate them is inflation. So that you might see the middle class in the United States do some less food waste
Mm.
and the lower class. But the reality is I don't think there's 15% extra food slack in the system. So I have a sneaky suspicion people are going to lose a little bit of weight in the next couple of years. I'm personally looking forward to it. I need to slough off some kilograms.
Yeah, so
But
do
but
I.
there's going to be some suffering. There's going to
Yeah.
definitely be some suffering, and in this case, I do think it'll hit the poorest countries the hardest.
There is something to be said for. I've put out a Substack today about how we've managed to avoid a catastrophe up to this point in time, because early on in the war, once the strait was closed, there was reportage after reportage saying, "My goodness, it's all over, Red Rover. We're in all kinds of crap." However, we've managed to get to June without too much stress. I mean, petrol prices have gone up, yes. Interest rates are going up, yes. You're absolutely right about the fertilizer. It's affecting us here in Australia as well. I think another commodity that comes out of the Gulf in particular is helium. That's also vitally
Yep.
important for the AI manufacturers out
Plastic.
there, plastic. So there are a whole heap of knock-on effects that are being affected, and yet somehow there's a cushion. Now, in this Substack, I wrote a cushion. I wrote the cushion. No, I wrote a piece about the cushion being the oil that's still in the Atlantic basin. So we have Canada, that's a shale oil
Yeah.
producer. The United States is fracking itself into being the number one oil producer in the world. Mexico's got some small fields. You've got Venezuela, which is
Scotland.
kind of online, offline. Guyana, which is now rocketing upwards in the stakes of oil. You've got
Yep.
Brazil, which is not doing too badly. You've got Argentina, which is now coming online as well. Now, these parts of Latin America will take a lot longer to be able to push themselves into the international marketplace as any form of replacement for Middle East oil, because light sweet crude in abundance comes only from the Middle East.
That's true.
And then of course you've got some African places, you've got Angola, you've got Nigeria as well. So
Nigeria,
you've
Scotland,
got
and Norway.
yeah. Well, I didn't want to say too much about that because their reserves are, they're always complaining about they're not having enough reserves. But if they really
Yeah.
wanted to frack the hell out of that, they could probably get more out of it too. So you've got the Atlantic Basin. Does this help us? Or is this just a chimera? Is this just an illusion that really, when the crunch time comes, it may be that we were just lucky. It may be that, wise governments around the world have started to pull in, or boost up, I should say, their strategic oil reserves and their diesel reserves and whatever else. Have we dodged a bullet? Have we got the cushion, or are we going to be facing a real catastrophe, say within maybe another 3 to 4 weeks?
I don't know what the timeline looks like.
Mm,
There's no doubt that there are going to be countries that are going to benefit from this because they're going to
yeah.
be able to put more oil out.
Mm,
Um, there's also a positive effect. I don't A positive for the economy, not in a global sense, but of having higher gas prices when you're paying $100 a barrel for oil. One of the positive effects of that is the more expensive to access fields can then go online. So,
yeah.
there are fields that have already been tapped in previous times that went offline because the price wasn't enough to make them profitable. They're now profitable. They'll go back online. So there's sort of like a capitalist fixing dynamic here that goes into play.
Mm,
There's already a bunch of oil because, like if a ship is leaving the Persian Gulf and it's heading to Houston, Texas, that ship is going to take a couple of months to get to Texas. In other words, there's already a bunch of oil that's still in the system that needs to be processed. It needs to be put online. So there was a buffer of
mm,
a few months. I think what's happened now is people are speculating the war is turning around, and that it's going to end soon. And so that's keeping the prices of everything a little bit lower. If it doesn't end soon, at some point there will be a big price to pay because if that oil doesn't start flowing, I don't know how we're supposed to keep things going. There's also a knock-on effect in that the GCC is really struggling.
mm,
Nobody wants to talk about this, and I'll probably get in trouble for doing it. But like I'll just give you an example. I know of a project that was a few tens of millions of dollars. It was somewhere over 50 million, less than 100 million. That has been on hold for 3 months. And I'm thinking for a GCC state, like let's say it was $100 million project, I thought that was pocket change. So
yeah.
for them to put it on hold means to me that all of a sudden they're looking for every penny to figure out how to navigate out of this. If the GCC economies are in trouble and do tank, it will have a major effect. One of the reasons why the global economy works the way it does is the petrodollar.
Hmm.
And if they don't have that money to put into banks, those banks aren't going to be able to make loans. And that will definitely start to hurt the global economy. It won't be instantaneous. It will take years for this to roll out. And I think that's one of the things that people maybe don't fully understand is some of these effects are going to take a while, like agriculture.
Yeah.
The farmers that were planting this spring they're going to do their harvest in October. That's when the 15% fewer calories are going to kick in. We're eating the food that was produced from last season's in the northern hemisphere, right?
Yeah, that's
In the
right.
southern
Mm,
right in the southern hemisphere, it's you're the reverse. But how much food is produced in the southern hemisphere compared to the northern hemisphere? The majority of the world's food is produced in the northern hemisphere. So that it's gonna take a while for those things to actually come into the marketplace. What's interesting is the U.S. stock market is going in a fantastic direction. It's like these guys are, I don't know what news they're looking at. Like, and as
I
long as
think,
they keep doing,
Roy, I think it's called microdosing. It's a big thing in America. I don't
yeah, it
know what
is.
planet they're on. They seem to be doing the stock
It's a
markets for
different planet.
Mars. I just don't get it,
I
because
don't get it.
everything that you say resonates with me, and I think would resonate with much of our audience. I mean, we're starting to see things that hurt. Interest rates are going up. Fuel prices are going through the roof. Food, oh my God, food. I mean, I can tell you about going shopping,
Yeah,
and buying a bag of shopping for $100 now. I mean, it's ridiculous. So we're
yeah.
starting to feel the
Also,
effects.
we missed. There was a few times when we went to the grocery store and there was no Australian beef on the shelf, and I want to protest that.
Oh
Thankfully, there
well,
was Kiwi beef there, but
it's
it
not
was
as good.
very upsetting.
Okay, so if what we're seeing now is a slow grind downwards, and we've got delusional people both in Wall Street who don't seem to be seeing what we're seeing. We've got delusional people in most of the capitals of the world because they're just doing crazy stuff, generally speaking. Where does that leave? Where does that leave the idea that we have any real hope for the future? Because even if the war were to end tomorrow, the damage to the international economy has been done, and it hasn't been
Yeah.
baked in yet. But eventually, as you rightly point out, give it sufficient time, all that damage is going to be baked in. So it will permanently lock in high prices for food, for water, for all the essentials of life that we've come to know and love, and also we've come to take for granted for so long. It's going to hurt.
I was looking at an economist, I can't remember who it was
Mm.
recently, and they were saying we're going to feel these effects for 2 to 3 years. It's not it's not that this is going to happen and in 3 months it's going to be over. There's going to be this rolling kind of knock-on effect. I
Mm.
was talking to a person who gave me some insider information on the auto industry, and that auto industry information was buy the car now because the price of cars is going to go up pretty dramatically in the next few months, in
Yep.
part because of the lack of plastic. That the auto industry is scrambling to try to figure out where to replace the plastic supply that isn't coming from the Persian Gulf. So it is, you might not feel it all at once, but it looks like we're gonna feel it for the next 2 to 3 years, sort of just rolling effects. What's
Mm.
on the table also is depression. And I
Yep.
don't mean something that you take an antidepressant for.
We'll
I
all be on
think
antidepressants.
we're gonna all need to be on antidepressants. If we let this war go on indefinitely, it will trigger a depression eventually. It's inevitable.
Sure. Sure.
That's what's on the table. What I don't understand is what the people that are negotiating for Trump are doing with Iran. Like, I don't even know how you extract yourself because
Mm.
Iran has all the cards. They don't have to, they don't, their economy's tanked. They don't care about depression. There's nowhere for it to go. They're,
Mm.
they've got the whole world right now in a position where they can kind of dictate. And they're going to be, no matter what happens, they're going to be so much better off and so much stronger on the other side. The people who have been looking at the treaty that Trump and his people have been proposing to Iran are now calling it Obama soft, Obama weak. And
Mm.
it's because it's not as good a deal as the JCPOA that Trump tore up in 2018. And
Right.
so here's this guy who's wrecked what already was, saying he could make it better, and he's made it worse. And it's at
Mm.
everything, like the damage he's done to healthcare in the United States, the damage
Yeah.
he's done to NATO, the damage,
Mm.
like everything ends up worse. What I want to do is I want to have a secret meeting with the heads of states of every country. This is my dream that
Mm.
interfered in the 2016 election to support Trump and ask them how they feel now. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
in part because I think anybody who had enough psychology in college and enough political science in college and enough history in college in 2016 should have known that there was no way good was going to come from a Trump election.
Mm.
And you know, everybody knows Russia interfered. There were a bunch of states that interfered,
Yeah.
including so-called U.S. allies that were
Mm.
doing this. And I think that would be a fascinating interview. Like, okay,
Mm.
what do you think now? 10 years on,
Yeah. Yeah.
how's it feeling? Is that a good move? Would you do it
Uh,
again?
that would be a great interview. We're going to have to work on that one. I need to get someone from the
I
other
have a
side
feeling
of.
they won't give it to me.
No. Well, look. I just want to ask you one more question on the whole Iran thing. A thought did occur to me, and that was the IRGC has had victory after victory after victory in this particular war, but often wartime leaders make really terrible peacetime leaders. So the current grouping of Ayatollah slash IRGC leaders may be able to chastise Trump with their lovely little Lego propaganda. They may be able to,
Yeah.
do all sorts of things to checkmate the United States in the region. But when the kinetic fighting, when the blockades stop, when the kinetic fighting stops, how will they be as peacetime stewards of a country, as you rightly point out, that's wrecked? And it's not just wrecked because of mismanagement. That's a huge component because, let's face it, the Ayatollahs were not really great managers of Iran. But
No.
then there is the economic, no, the ecological aspect as well that you touched on earlier. When you end up having major river systems dry up and prevent one of the largest cities in your country from having access to fresh water, that becomes an existential problem. And I can't see any IRGC commander going into the Iranian parliament and coming up with some common sense policies in all of this. I see that the victory that Iran has got now is more of a Pyrrhic victory than an actual victory. What do you say?
Yeah, it could be. So I, insider information that I don't know how reliable it is, and then just seeing sort of random news reports, it looks like Pezeshkian has resigned. So he was the
Right.
guy that was sort of the face in the beginning, especially in
Mm.
March and April of the IRGC. Um, he he's the kind of guy that has a lot of talent. So,
Mm.
I'm not going to agree with him on policy, but yeah, I can still accept that he knew what he was doing. He was that guy. And the rumor that he's resigned is because the IRGC is basically taken over.
Yeah.
So the non-IRGC factions within the government appear to have been basically quashed.
Mm.
So that's a disaster for Iran, exactly for the reasons that you're saying. The IRGC isn't, it would be like if the SS took over Germany
Yeah.
during World War II. Like
Exactly.
they are great fighters. There's no doubt about it. And
Mm.
they're amazing at genocide. Like,
Mm.
yes, yeah, you guys know how to slaughter civilians. You've got that
Mm.
down.
Mm.
But I wouldn't want you running my water system. I wouldn't want you running
Mm.
my electrical plant. I don't want you running my schools.
Yeah.
That's how the IRGC is, right? I, they're not, they're the guys you want fighting for you, not the guys you want running your government.
Mm.
And so if those rumors do turn out to be right, I think this is a disaster for Iran. It also means that the hardliners are in charge. And that'll make negotiating with the rest of the world even more complicated because they're going to see they're going to first of all their view of the world is that they've got a 40-year life expectancy because
Mm.
their assumption is Israel and the United States are going to kill them at any moment. So they don't feel like they have anything left to lose. So in their mind, this is a holy war. This
Mm.
is and you don't want those guys ever in charge, right? I mean, look at Israel, right?
Yeah.
Once the religious fanatics are in charge, they are going to lead you into a place you don't want to be. And of course, Iran from 1979 on was led by religious fanatics, but they were there was a tier, right? Khatami was
Mm.
on the extreme far
Yeah.
left of that tier, and Ahmadinejad was on the right. Like there was this continuum, and it fluctuated back and forth in large measure because the Iranian people were so active. The
Mm.
Iranian people, I went to Iran in 2002. Everywhere I went, everybody, talk to me about politics and history, I was completely blown away. I was only there for 2 weeks. I was completely blown away because you're walking down the street and they would walk up to me because they'd be like, "Oh, look, a foreigner." And they would start a conversation that, was on an intellectual level of what you would expect a person who's really steeped in politics. And it was so many people. And then Iranians are famous for being amazing engineers. They have a space program, they build drones, they're amazing scientists, they win global awards. Like Iran is a country filled with talent. And
It
and
is.
the Islamic Republic has held them down. It's pushed them in the wrong direction. But this war has empowered the fanatics, and people in Iran are filled with pride. They now support the government because they see it as it's either that or genocide by the Zionists and the imperialists.
Yeah, but
And
that only
that
goes so far, though, Roy. That only goes so far. If I can't get fresh water for my kids
that's true.
because, Commander Bloggs is screwing up the waterworks, or I don't have any
Yeah.
electricity, so the kids come home from school, can't do their homework, I think that I'd get mighty jacked off with those same commanders, and I would be looking for some form of retribution, which then leads me to the next thing, and that is before the war, the Iranian state was a state in turmoil. There were people on the streets protesting and, threatening the government with all sorts of things. Now, the thing that
Shooting
always,
at the government, setting government buildings on fire.
right, right, right.
Yeah, it was
But the one
insane.
thing, the one thing that the Iranian opposition, if you can call it that, or the opposition groups, which is probably more accurate, is that they couldn't congeal around a single idea, a single figure, and so
Yeah.
they probably hated themselves as much as they hated the hated government, which,
Yeah.
means that really, you can protest all you like, but the government always has the final word, and the final word is execution, right? And they did do that. The Iranian government prior to the war executed thousands of protesters. But again, going back to the idea that the war eventually will come to a halt, and then all of the same problems quickly rise to the surface because, again, now Iran
Worse.
is a damaged state. Exactly.
Yeah.
Infrastructure's been hit, not just military, but civilian infrastructure. Whatever was
War
just
crimes.
barely holding on is not working
Yeah.
anymore. So when
Yeah.
when all of a sudden peacetime appears to average Iranians, surely they're going to end up in the street on the streets again, and probably armed and dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of actually where I was going. I actually think it's in the IRGC's best interest now to not let the war end,
Right,
to keep
right.
it
I
going
yes,
perpetually.
yes,
And
yes.
and so they have this incentive to just keep stalling, keep making big demands and not letting the United States, not giving the United States a way to walk away, which is
Exactly.
one of the reasons why I think Trump turned on Netanyahu. I think he's already looking for his excuse, someone to
Mm,
blame so that he can get out and say, yeah,
mm,
yeah, I never meant for any of this to happen. It's not my fault.
mm,
And what I think could happen, and this is actually what I said was going to happen in the first week of March, is that what Trump will do is he will announce that the United States won without a
mm,
deal, and
mm,
he'll just walk away and leave the mess intact, and Iran will just own the Strait of Hormuz, and
mm,
it'll be a catastrophe, but a manageable catastrophe then, because you just pay your $2 million and your ship goes through.
mm, 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 mm. All right, now we're going to be swapping places in Asia right now. So from the Middle East, we'll go off to China. Roy, while much of the world's attention has been focused on the Middle East, another potentially historic development occurred in Asia recently. President Trump traveled to Beijing and met with Xi Jinping. What
Yeah,
particularly caught my attention was Xi's public reference to Graham Allison's concept of the Thucydides trap. I mean, that's a remarkable concept for a
yeah,
Chinese leader to invoke publicly, right? How long,
yeah.
now, how did you interpret that meeting? Are Washington and Beijing attempting to stabilize their rivalry, or are we merely seeing a temporary pause in a much deeper strategic competition?
Yeah, so, there, I felt like there were two things going on simultaneously. One, as you point out, the Thucydides trap,
Mm,
that, two rivals will inevitably have to do a war.
yep.
And why, let's not do that. Let's do peace instead. we should be cooperating. He literally said we will get so much more out of helping each other, develop each other's countries, and make the world a better place. What a message. Perfect. And like, who can be mad at Xi for that message? At the same time, though, I felt like there were little subtle things that were happening. When when Xi was introducing Trump to the Chinese cabinet ministers, she was walking in front of Trump. And then when Trump was introducing Xi to the U.S. cabinet ministers or cabinet secretaries, she was still walking in front of Trump. Like there was this weird body language thing that was going on. Trump was bent over and his hands were clasped and between his legs. He looked like he had been chastised, and
Or
she was
castrated.
castrated, and it was still hurt.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, especially if they use the squish method.
Ooh.
Um,
Yes.
so, like at the end of the day, I felt like there was this great message coming from Xi about let's cooperate, let's make the world a better place. But at the same time, it really felt like Trump was being pwned a little bit. She didn't meet him
Mm,
at the airport. There were just these
yeah.
little subtle things. And
Mm,
I think what it was, my interpretation was that this was a way China was exerting itself and saying, our position is so strong relative to yours. You've trapped yourself in this dumb war. You've you're crippling the global economy in the process. We're going to be hurt by it because China is definitely getting hurt, but not like you are. And there might have even been a little bit of we want to humiliate you a little bit. We want to put you in your place a little bit. And here's a great opportunity. What was it, 2 days later, Putin flew in and she met him at the airport and they were like, buddy,
yeah.
buddy. They were practically
Yeah.
holding hands.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Putin was skipping
Okay.
around.
But what did that picture actually mean in the scheme of things? So, okay, it was a power play by Xi against Trump, but with Putin in, Putin comes in as a junior partner, not as an
Yeah,
equal to
definitely not an
Beijing.
equal.
So in actual fact, how do you think China sees its role in the world now? Because from a historical perspective, the old dynasties used to run this tributary system where they didn't
Yeah,
go anywhere else, but everyone else had to
people
come
came to
to
him.
Beijing, right, or to Peking
Yeah,
back then, right? So is that what was going on here?
that's a good question. I think that's definitely the case with Putin. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
sure that was technically the case with Trump. I just
mm,
think she, sort of used a little bit of theatrics to make it feel that way.
yeah.
And then Trump obliged, right? He doesn't have to bend over and stick his hands between his legs. Um, I think I think Trump was, feeling the pressure of this war, and he didn't know how to behave. He wasn't aware of his body language and what he was doing, or what he was saying. He when he would talk, he was so mousy. It was really interesting because it wasn't the typical Trump bombastic.
Mm, mm.
He would frown at inappropriate times. You're like, do you have gas? Like, I don't understand why you're frowning. Like when she was talking about let's make the world a better place, Trump's got a furrowed eyebrow. Like, why are you mad at this? Let's at least pretend this is a good thing. In
Mm,
the case of Putin, one of the goals Putin had when he took over in 2000 was that under no circumstances was he ever going to let Russia get underneath China, that he was going to maintain Russian sovereignty and autonomy from China.
yeah.
And, for the first 22 years, I'm including the Medvedev years as Putin years. For that first 22 years, it looked like Putin was pulling it off.
Mm,
When he inherited Russia, it had an economy the size of Portugal's. And Portugal is the poorest Western European country, right? Like, I mean, Russia, this massive state, had an economy the size of the worst Western state, Western European state. And he turned it around. The Russian economy by 2022 was amazing. It was, people felt like they had money. The oligarchs were as happy as could be. Uh, it looked like he had pulled it off. And then he upgraded the war in Ukraine, right? Because he invaded in 2014. The
mm,
war didn't start in 2022. It started in 2014. He upgraded the war and put Russia into this catastrophic position where it had no choice but to become a vassal of China. And I
mm.
think that this last 4 years, that's what Putin's going to be remembered for. He's the guy that subordinated Russia to China. He's the guy who wrecked his own goal with the stupid attack in 2022. He got Crimea. Like, what was the point in attacking in 2022? Like, what was he gonna get? Yeah, I think he thought he was gonna get half of Ukraine, and it was just such a catastrophic miscalculation. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I think she has really enjoyed now that he's emperor, now that there's right, he'll serve for life instead of 10 years like they used to do it,
Mm.
is he's China keeps getting win after win after win, but by doing nothing, right?
Yeah.
They won in
Yeah.
Ukraine because Putin's an idiot. They won
Mm,
in Iran because Trump's an idiot. Like
mm,
all she
mm.
has to do is just sit back and watch these idiot leaders do one dumb thing after the other. And he
Never
just
get in the way, never get in the way of someone making a mistake, Roy.
exactly.
You know. But I suppose, in many ways, you can say that. But then if you look at the other side of the equation, I mean, China has got its own domestic problems. It doesn't advertise them very well, but they
Yeah.
are nonetheless real. He also has a foreign policy noose around his own neck, and arguably it's only a matter of time before that comes home to roost as
Yeah.
well, and that's Pakistan and its relationship with Pakistan. Pakistan is a very peculiar ally. It's playing the United States off against the Chinese right now. And the Pakistanis aren't known to be great winners at this sort of game. So, how that's going to affect China Pakistan relations moving into the future is anyone's guess. Likelihood of a quagmire there at some point is quite high, I would imagine. And so while Xi can sit down and crow about his success, and yes, you are absolutely right, by keeping his powder dry, China now looks imperial. It doesn't look like a challenger anymore. It looks like a
No.
peer. It looks like a
Yeah.
peer. And if in politics perception is anything, that is mighty powerful
It
perception.
is. Perception
Yeah.
is reality.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It
Politics.
is.
It
Absolutely.
is.
Absolutely.
He also has a bad relation with India. He's
Yep.
been picking on the Philippines. There's
Yes.
Taiwan. The relationship with Japan has only gotten worse. Uh,
Mm.
North Korea is still this unpredictable powder keg waiting to go off. He's got a lot of problems. And then domestically, you're right. There is serious dissatisfaction with the system
Mm.
in China right now, and they are suffering economic uh, consequences for the war in Iran. And
Mm.
it looks like even though China is insulated from some of the energy stuff, when you remember that Chinese manufacturing is based on plastic,
Yeah.
if there's no plastic, they're still screwed. So you're
Mm.
right.
Mm.
He has a lot of problems. If I were him, I would stop picking on countries like the Philippines and start working on making deals with them. To
Yeah,
me,
that would be a
I would
better way.
rather have. Yeah, I think he's made big mistakes by being too aggressive. So
Mm.
it's
Mm.
not that he's perfect by any means. It's just Russia and the United States have given him such big wins. He can he
Oh
can
yeah.
he can still dance a lot.
Mm.
The reality is, in my imaginary hopeful moments that I used to have that are gone because Trump has completely destroyed all hope for me.
Mm.
Um, what I thought would happen was as the United States empire started to get older and maybe, a little bit more oxytocin and a little bit less testosterone, maybe it could stop attacking third world countries and just buy the resources it wanted from them and then become kind of a balance against any Chinese aggression. And
Mm.
that was kind of my envision hope. And, the Trans-Pacific Partnership I thought could be a way to kind of create that. And of course, the United States refused to join, which actually turned out to be the
Yeah.
best thing because
Mm.
then,
Mm.
right, the treaty got redone in a way that was more beneficial for everybody, including the working class, because the
Mm.
United States had, gone in with no, workers are garbage. We can't
Yeah.
treat them well. So the United States, instead of taking the role of being the counterweight, has increasingly isolated itself. And I think that's been my big disappointment over the last 10 years. I was
Mm.
I was really hoping that we were going to go in a very different direction. more like Germany, and just sort of
Mm.
own our bad behavior from the past and then say we're going to try and be better going forward. Um, and and so yeah, that's to me that's the big disappointment.
Yeah, I share that disappointment. I think that I was expecting more and better from the United States. But again, it goes into a different rabbit warren if we start going into domestic US politics, because today I want to touch on all the international flashpoints. So bear with me while we get through. Okay. So
Oh, you don't want to talk about Tellerico, James Tellerico in Texas?
no, 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 no. The next podcast we'll talk about him. All right. So,
Okay.
staying in Asia and staying close to China, Taipei would have watched the meeting between Trump and Xi very carefully.
Yeah.
Whenever great powers begin talking about stability, smaller powers often worry that they're going to be, next as a bargaining chip. From
Yeah.
Taiwan's perspective, was the Trump-Xi meeting reassuring or deeply unsettling? I can guess your answer.
I mean, I actually don't know how Taipei interpreted it. My thinking is if I were Taiwan, I would have been nervous. I would have walked away thinking, okay, that was scary. In part
Mm,
because we don't know what was said behind closed doors. Especially
mm,
because Trump is, Venezuela, Iran. Now he's talking about Cuba, what he did with Greenland. There's all these things that are actually totally unresolved.
yeah.
Venezuela's unresolved. He's
Mm,
and I can very easily see she saying something to him along the lines of, "We're gonna allow you to keep expanding and doing these things, but there will be a price that we're gonna want to
mm,
extract down the road."
mm.
And when you think about the fact the United States has fired off its entire missile supply, um,
Yep.
if China makes a move on Taiwan, like how's the United States going to stop it?
Mm,
Because warfare now is about missiles. It's really tanks are just not that meaningful. At the end of World War II, tanks weren't very meaningful. I feel like this emphasis on tanks is like this antiquated, decades old mindset that we just haven't sloughed off.
mm,
The future is about RPGs and missiles and drones. And and if you're firing all your missiles and drones at Iran and you don't have the ability to produce them, which blows my mind, like what idiot country deindustrializes?
mm.
Then how are you supposed to keep up with things as they get worse? Like if we start heading towards World War III and we're looking at China invading Taiwan and it turns into a flashpoint, I don't know how the United States has proven it doesn't have any resilience. And it
See,
fought Iran for
you're
3 months.
absolutely right. One of the things or a lesson that should have been learned from both Iran and from Ukraine is that the economics of modern warfare is just simply unsustainable.
It
We've
is,
spent billions, if not trillions of dollars collectively in the West on these expensive boutique United States weapon systems. They look sexy, they
yeah,
exude power, and yes, in a short contest, they can do amazing things. But
yeah,
the world is not being, created in a way that supports that sort of war fighting anymore. Now, you could say that it was a misuse of technology, but back in the counterinsurgency war on terror that we were fighting, America had absolute technological dominance because it was fighting against no peer and it wasn't expending all the really expensive stuff. But since they've
yeah,
cooked off at least a third of their ballistic missile interceptors, cooked off a third of their precision guided munitions in fighting a war that could have been completely bloody avoided.
yeah,
Living in this part of the world, it sends a shiver up my spine because really the future of warfare seems to belong to the countries that create their own domestic internal supply chains that can produce drones, that can produce missiles, and they just have to produce enough of them to stay in the fight without having to, create these exquisite systems. Well, what is it? The JSF, the F-35 Lightning. I mean, what is it? About 3 years before it gets out of the fact, it becomes a thing in a factory and then goes out of the factory and then gets deployed to a national air force. That's a bloody long time in
That
anyone's
is.
language. And a war happens like that. Now, if you're halfway through acquiring, say, 70 JSFs at extraordinary national expense, and you've only got half your fleet and the war has already been won by your opponent, you're screwed.
Yeah.
And who's responsible for those decisions? I mean, who makes those? We've got defense ministers, we've got their ministries underneath them, all of them very highly paid, all of them without a doubt highly educated, and all of them knowing this is a problem, and yet they're doubling down on doing the same thing expecting a different bloody result. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like the definition of insanity to me. What are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean, I think so much of politics is theater and window dressing. And I
Yeah,
think that's where some of that comes from. The United States Congress keeps buying tanks for the United States Army. The United States Army for a decade and a half has been begging Congress to stop buying it tanks.
yeah,
It's like we don't know where to put them. We don't have any use for them. So they end up mothballing them. And they're just, I have never heard of a military asking its legislature to stop buying in equipment. Like I don't even know what that's so ups. It's like people don't starve to death on Earth anymore. They eat to death, right? Like the world is upside down.
mm,
I think what happens is politicians they're looking for the sexy, big profile thing. Like I don't even know what to do with the numbers. The extinction rate on the planet is somewhere between 200 species a year to 100,000 species a year, depending on how many species there are, right? Because we don't know. But there are
yeah,
some estimates that there's 100 million species on the planet. And if so, then we're losing 100,000 a year, which is 1/1000th. It's insane. We don't even know what these species are. We haven't cataloged them. We don't, but the polar bear is going extinct and everybody knows about it because it's
yeah,
the high profile animal, it's the big animal. If
mm,
don't get me wrong, I don't want the polar bear to go extinct, but if it did, it would have a very marginal impact on the world. Some of these smaller animals that aren't sexy and aren't interesting, if they go extinct, they will have a catastrophic effect on ecosystems. And I
mm,
think that's what happens to politicians. They get focused too much on the big sexy prize and they forget about these other things that might be a little bit more critical. And I
mm,
and I think that's where the emphasis on tank warfare or some of the big pieces like F-35s comes into play. In the case
mm,
of Iran, they produce their own drones. They're the second or third largest, I think third largest. I think the third largest drone
mm.
producer on the planet.
Correct.
The way they got the drone was the in the war in Afghanistan when the United States had catastrophic technological superiority over the Taliban. They had flown a drone a little too close to the Iranian border, and the Iranians were prepared. They had like $10 worth of equipment that they bought from Radio Shack, and they were sitting there on the border for months, waiting for a drone to get close enough. It got close enough, they hacked it and landed it in Iran and reverse engineered it. And and that's why they are the number one drone supplier to the Russians. That is
Yeah.
why they have been pummeling the GCC with drones. They're like, that was a stupid use of technology. You're fighting guys that are, fighting from caves and you're using the most advanced equipment and you literally just handed it to your enemy. just, just, it was crazy. Um,
Yeah. A lot of that going
yeah.
around.
Yeah. And that's the
Well,
kind of weird short-sightedness that the political elite keep making, right? They're like, let's put the sexy weapons in the field. It's like not necessarily the thing you need to do right now. How about you come up with a strategy to actually win the war instead of doing the big high profile stuff?
which then leads me to the other thing as well. And a lot of things have been said, and we'll be touching on Europe in a minute, but a lot of things have been said with regard to Europe being able to defend itself. Does it have the defense industry requirement? Does it have anything that can, allow them to be more independent as a grouping from the United States? And I would say, yes, it does. It's got plenty, but it's if they are trying to catch up with the Americans in a technological race that the Americans have beaten them hands down in over the last 30, 40 years. Get out of that race altogether and start doing what the Iranians have done. Build drones, build cheap
Yeah,
missiles, automate
exactly.
some of that stuff, but you can do it at cost and at scale. And all of a sudden, you're
Yeah.
going to end up having a ferocious armed force that not even the United States would be able to best. But what I find really strange is that when you look at the EU and you look at these people who are starting to just get into the defense game, they're talking the big talk about sixth generation fighter aircraft that are going to,
Yeah.
again, one aircraft costs half of a national GDP. And it's like, well, what's the
Yeah.
bloody point of that? All you have to do is get lucky and shoot one of those damn things down, and
Just
then
one.
what? And then what? So I
Yeah.
think again, sustainability in weapons manufacture, at least at the lower end of the spectrum, can actually give Europe a number of wins, and arguably countries like Australia as well. And the irony of that statement is that here in Australia, we're known for something. It's called the cultural cringe. Anything that's locally based and locally done is frowned upon. If it's sold overseas, it's still frowned upon, and the Australians won't touch it for a barge pole. Now, in drone warfare and counter drone systems, we've got some of the best in the world, and we're flogging these things off to the Ukrainians who are making mincemeat out of whatever Russia is throwing over the border. And
Yeah.
yet, you don't see the Australian Defence Force saying, well, this stuff is actually working in real time. I wonder whether or not we could integrate some of that stuff for our own defensive purposes. No, we won't think of that. We'll go to Uncle Sam and say, oh, we need another 75 JSF fighters. And by the way, those AUKUS submarines? Oh, there's a story for you. You know, there's a story for you, Roy. Just a little bit of a
Yeah.
segue. So we have these three boats coming in from the United States, Virginia class boats, right? Latest and greatest. And they were going to be the cutting edge of our nuclear powered fleet because, of course, the idea being we're going to buy a bunch from the United States, just a small bunch, three to five of the Virginias, and then in time, sometime in the 2040s, probably the 2050s, 2060s, we'll end up getting a whole new fleet of nuclear powered submarines called the SSN AUKUS. Now, it's been told to the Australian people that for all the billions of dollars of taxpayers' money that we've handed to the Trump administration to secure the very best of American shipbuilding, and apparently the very best of shipbuilding meant that we were going to get one brand spanking new Virginia and two second-hand ones. We're now getting three second-hand ones. What's the bet
Nice.
on
Congrats.
Polymarket? Yeah, yeah, yeah. What's the bet on Polymarket that we don't end up getting any submarine? I mean, this is like a movable feast. And again, we're putting so much public money into this project, which eats into other defense projects along the way. And I'm not saying submarines aren't a good investment. They are. But
Yeah.
we're a small power. Why don't we operate within our comfortable limits? Why don't we go to the Japanese and say, "Hey, let's work on a conventional submarine together. We're both US allies. We're never going to fight another war against each other. We love the
Yeah.
Americans. Let's do ourselves a favor and work on what we're comfortable working on, not go
Yeah.
down this rapid warren of nuclear energy we're not really well kitted out for because we've never, well, apart from Lucas Heights, which is a small reactor, a research reactor out of just outside of Sydney, we don't have anything here. And here we're meant to be developing a nuclear industry to support nuclear powered submarines. And then, we get this bomb dropped on our head saying, oh, well, now we're only getting three and they're going to be secondhand. And now the government is looking at trying to boost that number to five, which means the Australian taxpayer is going to have to pay even more for old submarines. I don't know about you. I think we've been completely ripped off. But according to the Trump people, this is the way business is being conducted, right? This is the
Yeah.
American way, stiff your allies and your opponents.
Exactly.
I
Everything's
mean,
transactional. There's no loyalty, and
no, none.
there's no cause. The only cause is to make money.
Yes.
I'm going to throw this out here. I hear France had some submarines they wanted to sell you.
Don't raise that. Yes, they did, but it's a long story, long story.
Oh, a
Uh,
little
and I love the
backstabbing.
I love the French. This look. I wasn't a great look. Truth be told, during 2015, during the competitive evaluation process, I was involved with another national organisation called the Royal United Services Institute of Australia, and together Sage International as well as the RUSI put together something called the Sub Summit, and it was all about getting the competitors together in one room, finding out which is going to be the better deal for Australia, and seeing how local national defence industry would react to it. And, our little group, the RUSI and SAGE, were backing the Japanese. The French won the bid.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we had a change of government and everything was just thrown up in the air when Prime Minister Morrison announced AUKUS. And we were all standing there slack-jawed, wondering what the hell happened, and then had to pay the French out to the tune of about $1 billion to break
Yeah.
all the contracts that we just signed with them, which was
And
just
it
throwing
made
good money
France
after bad.
furious.
It was, well, it made France furious, which is never a good thing because they are an ally and they're a regional
Yeah.
ally because they own Numia and a couple of other little islands in the Pacific and around the Indian Ocean. So they're useful for us as well. So, yeah, let's go ahead and piss everyone off and then end up with nothing, which was exactly what Morrison put us in. And then we had this concept about AUKUS and the Brits were going to help build boats. We can nag and complain about submarine construction in the United States, and there's a lot of things that we can say about them. But have you seen British submarine construction lately? It's so far worse than the Americans. The idea
Yeah.
that the three countries will be able to match capacities and pull this magic trick out of a hat is what did I say about insanity earlier? But anyway, no,
Yeah.
nonetheless, yeah, it's crazy, crazy stuff.
Well, so w- this is something that gets me. From the decision to make the Saturn V rocket,
Mm.
so 64, to the last time they produced a Saturn V rocket, which I want to say was like 72, something like,
72, 72.
yeah. So it's like 8 years.
Mm.
In today dollars, it costs $10 billion. They produced 15. So from the start of design to the end of production, they made 15 Saturn V rockets.
Yep.
When they made the Artemis rockets, it took them 12 years, not 8. They
Mm.
made two for $15 billion in today dollars, which is to me shocking because you
Yep.
made 15 for 10 in 8 years, and then it took you 12 years to make two for 15. Like, what happened? And I
Mhm.
think anybody should have been paying attention to that, going, oh yeah, the US is just not capable of making anything anymore. And
Mhm.
the worst part about that Artemis story is that was it. They're only going to make two. They're never going to make another one. So they
Mm.
spent all this money to and time and energy and technology to make these two rockets that they've already fired, so they're done.
Mm.
And there's no follow through. Like at least with the Saturn V, the thinking was they
Yep.
weren't going to stop at 15. They were going to go to Mars with it. This was the beginning
Mhm.
of our Mars program.
Mm. It
And
was.
in the case of the United States, the goal was never to get anything except not even land on the moon. We aren't even going to land on the moon with these rockets. We just wanted to go
Mm.
around it again. Like,
Mm.
what's the point? Was Apollo 9 the first to go around the moon or Apollo 8?
Apollo 8, 8.
Okay.
Mm.
And then Apollo 10 went around the
Mm.
moon. You're like, we've already done this. How many times do we want to go around the moon?
We did
We
it with
don't
better
need,
cameras now. We did it with much better
yeah,
cameras.
much better cameras. Yeah. Yeah. And thankfully, the Indian Space Agency, I forget what its actual name is, flew over the Apollo 11 landing site and took a photograph so that everybody could see that there really is a landing craft at the Apollo
So,
11.
so flat earthers and conspiracy theorists take that.
Take that. I saw a Facebook post. And the picture of Apollo 11 lander was so obviously AI, and it was in the middle of this
No.
crater. And I was like, what? So here you are, you're trying to convince the flat earthers and the people that don't believe we landed on the moon that it was faked by making an AI faked picture. Use the actual picture. Why are you using a fake? Now everybody's going to be like, see, it's fake. There's a
Yeah,
fake picture.
yeah. So, anyway,
Uh,
let's go back. Let's get back on track and talk
okay,
about good
whatever.
old Europe and NATO because I mean we've got to cover that off. Yeah. Okay. So another underreported development has been the withdrawal of roughly 5,000 American troops from Germany. Numerically,
Yeah.
that might not seem too dramatic, but symbolically, it matters greatly because Europe already questions the long-term reliability of American commitments. Are we simply witnessing temporary force redistribution on the European continent by the United States, or the gradual redefinition of America's role in Europe?
So I think it's the latter. I think we're seeing the United States. withdrawing basically from Europe. Having said that, it also kind of depends on what happens in 2028, what happens in 2032. So if Trump runs a third time and wins a third time, I mean, I think you just need to write the United States off. Like it's just I don't know how you come back from that.
Yeah.
Um, what will more likely happen, I think, at this point, like if the election in 2028 happened now, is that this milquetoast mediocre white male Democrat's going to win, and he's going to do a bunch of nothing for 4 years. He won't even reverse what Trump did. He'll just do
Mm.
another 4 years of Biden, basically, and just
Yeah.
sit there comatose. And then what I think will happen then is the American public will get even more radicalized. And in 2032, we're going to see an even crazier president than Trump, and the United States
Wow.
will continue down this path. And the reason I'm saying this is because of past history, right? Like
Mm.
this seems to be the pattern. The right picks an idiot, he takes over, and then the left picks a dummy, and that guy does a bunch of nothing, and it pisses off the public, and then they pick another right winger, every time it gets more and more radical until finally the system breaks. And so I feel like that's the path that the United States is on. But it doesn't have to be. It could be that there used to be in the United States this thing called party realignment, where periodically there would be this shift in public awareness, and all of a sudden the United States would just change direction.
Mm.
And, FDR ushered in that age. Ronald Reagan ushered in an age for conservatism. Lincoln ushered in an age. That we've had these moments where there were just the direction of politics changed. If that's what's about to happen in the United States, then you might actually see like at least a temporary resurgence of the United States in a positive way. And it's possible. I don't want to rule it out. It's entirely possible that the American public, the voters have gone, oh my God, making bad decisions in elections maybe really is a dumb idea. Let's see if we can start making better decisions. And if that is the case, then I think you might see a president who starts to roll back the clock on what Trump has done. Having said that, fleet in waiting is what Europe, Australia, what the GCC, what the countries in the world that used to rely on the United States and can't anymore need to do.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is you don't have to win the war. You have to make the war so expensive to the other guy that the other guy doesn't want to fight you. So, for
Mm.
example, in World War II, Germany sat down and did the math of invading Sweden. And the reason they were going to do it was they were worried that because Sweden was their primary iron supply, they were worried that the Allies would interrupt that iron flow. And so they sat down and thought, what if we just preemptively invade Sweden and secure it? And when they did the math, they knew they would defeat Sweden. That wasn't an issue. The amount of material and personnel they were going to lose doing it made it so that it wasn't worth it. And they just were like, we're going to leave it alone.
Mm.
And that needs to be everybody's goal right now. Germany and the rest of Europe doesn't need to have an offensive military like you were saying. What they need to do is need to make it so that it's so nasty if you attack them
Mm.
that
Mm.
attacking them just looks stupid.
Yeah.
And that's all you need to do. If your goal is peace, not imperialism, all you need to
Mm.
do is just make it so that it's an undesirable part of your equation, right?
Yeah.
That's how Switzerland has avoided war for 200 years.
Mm.
They've turned themselves into a fortress that's just too nasty to attack. And and I think that's what Europe needs to start thinking about is don't like you were saying earlier, don't do the big expensive prize things. Just make
Mm.
it so that there's no reason for anybody to want to mess with you. They're better off trading with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Here to that. All right, now, Ukraine. Despite continued Russian advances, casualty rates remain enormous in Ukraine for Russia. Some estimates suggesting losses exceeding 35,000 killed and wounded each month. If those losses continue, Putin may eventually face difficult choices, either consolidate his gains and negotiate a peace settlement or move toward a much broader mobilization effort. Is Russia entering a politically dangerous phase, or has Putin constructed a sufficiently resilient system to sustain this indefinitely?
So I don't know how you can lose a million plus people in a 4 year span of time
I don't know
in
either.
20, what is it, 2026,
Mm,
and not
mm.
start to alienate your public.
Yeah,
In 2022, Dubai actually experienced a very large population increase because a bunch of
Russians.
rich Russians and a bunch of rich Ukrainians moved here.
Yep, yep.
And it's to the point where, one of the main shopping malls has its signs in English, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian
Mm,
because there's a huge Russian community here.
mm.
So a bunch of money fled. A bunch of oligarchs hit the road. By the way, they mostly just live in hotels. They've been living in hotels for 4 years now. They didn't even buy property. They just stay in a hotel.
Mm.
And I think they think being here is a temporary thing. It's a good thing for them. I think a lot of them left when the war started with Iran, but a lot of them stayed because I see them, so I know they're still here.
Yep.
That was disaster for Russia because it was a big chunk of their economy that literally just packed up and left. And and those little wounds that Russia has sustained because of this war, they are adding up, and it's caused Russia to become a vassal state to the Chinese. It's put Russia in this really awkward position globally. It's damaged its economy. I don't know how long Russia can sustain doing this long term, especially because they're doing human waves like they did in World War
Yeah,
II.
yeah.
Like it's a nightmare.
Mm,
It's psychologically wearing them down. They're in a similar boat in many ways to Israel.
mm.
Their economy is suffering. If it wasn't for North Korea and Iran helping and the China helping the Russians would have probably already had to have capitulated. Um,
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I think at the end of the day, uh, it'll be resolved when Putin dies. I have a sneaky suspicion that whoever the next president of Russia is just going to stand up and go, "We're sorry, and we'll keep Crimea, but we'll pull out. Maybe they'll keep half of Donetsk and half of Luhansk or something. They'll
Mm,
make a deal that Ukraine can live with because I just don't know. I don't even understand what they're trying to do at this point. Like,
yeah.
why does Russia need to get an extra square kilometer of anything?
Mm.
It's they
It's
should
the
have been
biggest
spending
country in the
this
world, right?
they should have been spending this energy on developing Siberia. I mean, they got this
Mm,
giant chunk of land that in 20 years is going to be prime real estate once the planet
yeah,
heats up. And
yeah.
like, why are you messing with Ukraine? In 20 years, some of its rivers will be dried up. Like,
Mm, 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 mm.
it's in the
Yeah,
wrong
exactly.
direction. Go
Mm.
north.
All right. So, Roy, when you step back from everything that we've discussed tonight, that is Iran, Israel, energy security, US China rivalry, Russia's war in Ukraine, and the future of NATO and the future of American power, let's not forget, it increasingly feels as though we're moving away from the relatively predictable post-Cold War world era, I should say post-Cold War era, and into something far more volatile. So, if you were advising policymakers, business leaders, and even ordinary citizens alike, what is the single most important reality about the world of 2026 that people still haven't fully grasped?
Yeah, that's such a hard question. So, okay, so first of all, there's so many moving parts, right? I mean,
Mm,
we've got global warming. There's going to be some knock-on effect from this war. We've already experienced damage to the global economy from the Russia war in Ukraine, right? There's all these
mm,
little pieces. There's microplastics. Uh, I guess the thing that surprises me and the thing that kind of leaves me in a state of like, what's going on here, is how bad most of the leadership decisions on the planet are.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying every leader has been bad. I definitely can point to moments when leaders have made really fantastic decisions. But I feel like if you take, 70% of the decisions have been awful and 30% have been good.
Mm, mm,
Uh, and when you put it together, that's not a good score. And it's a lot of times it's the small countries that tend to have better decisions being made. And I think it's in part because the small countries know they have more at stake. They can afford to make fewer mistakes. So they have a tendency to do a little bit better. And I
mm,
think the big countries are sloppy and they think that I can afford to make some mistakes. I'm just going to make the decision that feels right for me. But a lot of the world is electoral republics. And whether you're in India or in Germany or United States or Mexico or Brazil or Australia or Japan, those countries are those publics are electing those officials. At the end of the day, if you're an electoral republic and your government is making bad decisions, that's your fault. Like that's the thing I think
Yes.
citizens don't realize.
Mm,
If you want to be part of a so-called democracy, an electoral republic, and you take pride in that, and that's your thing, then you need to know the buck stops with the citizen.
mm,
And unfortunately, we live in an era where citizens are lazy and they don't read and they don't keep up with what's happening on the planet. And so you have an uninformed, undereducated citizenry running around making the most important decisions, and they're messing up in a really big way. I mean, if you live in a state that's, just had a coup d'etat and now there's a tyrant ruling you, you can't blame the citizens because they're the victims of this. But when you're in a state where you're making the elections, it's 100% the fault of the citizens. Everything that happens, whether you voted for the guy that won or not, because that's the social contract. You get to have a say, but then you're responsible for the outcome. And I think the citizens think that it's all the politicians, and it's no, you picked them.
mm,
It's
mm,
your
mm.
fault. And I
Yeah,
and
we're
I
always
wish
looking for an excuse. We're always looking for an
Yeah,
excuse. Not
exactly.
me,
Someone
it's
else to
them.
blame.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
never me. It's never me. And I
correct.
think we don't. And people will. There are bumper stickers in the United States that you'll see. You'll say, "I didn't vote for him." Yeah, but that's the social contract. Whether you won, your side won or lost, you accept the outcome, which
That's
means
right.
you're still responsible for the outcome. And I think people have lost touch with that. And
Mm.
they're just, I'm going to blame that other party because I really hate people from that other party. And it's like, no, that's not how this works.
Yeah, the other
And
party isn't the enemy, it is your
yeah,
cohabitant. And
exactly. It's your
the ideas you're
neighbor, your
fight
cousin.
yeah, exactly. The ideas you're fighting over isn't, existential. It's about how are we going to manage the country moving forward. So
Exactly.
that's a brain war, not a physical punch up, right? But at the moment, everything seems to be turning into a physical punch up. I hate your guts. Your politics is stinky. You're woke.
Yeah.
You're fascist. You're this. You're that. We're all great with
Yeah.
name calling, and yet we don't look at ourselves and say, well, where are we in all of this? Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the fact that people don't want to be around people they disagree with is really bad.
Yeah.
Wh-
Yeah.
What citizens need to be able to do is not only talk to people that they disagree with, but try to understand their perspective.
Correct.
And
Correct.
and instead, it's always this sort of really angry reaction, and we very quickly turn, a
Mm.
conversation that could have been productive into this shouting match. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, the core of the problems that we're having right now in the world. I
Mm.
think if we could get a better citizenry, we'd have better leadership. And
Mm.
even if you live in a monarchy, having good citizens is a good idea, right?
Oh,
Having
sure.
educated citizens is a good idea,
Mm.
but obviously it has less impact because you're not voting for your government. But Saudi Arabia has local elections. So
Mm.
even a country like Saudi Arabia, which we think of as like an absolute monarchy, it's not technically
Mm.
fully absolute monarchy anymore. They have local governments that are elected. I live in
Mm.
an absolute monarchy, and I think it's a fantastic system. So no
Mm.
complaint.
Mm.
But
Mm.
so much of the world isn't that anymore. It's
Yeah.
electoral republics,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
it's and as a global citizen, we have to start taking responsibility for what's happening in the world instead of always finding somebody else to blame.
Professor Roy Casagranda, thank you very much for joining us once again on the Focus podcast. Roy, it's always a pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to the next time.
Thanks, John.
One of the themes that emerged repeatedly throughout tonight's discussion is that we may be entering a period where crises are no longer isolated events. The war in Ukraine affects all of European security. Conflict in the Middle East impacts global energy markets. Competition between Washington and Beijing shapes decisions from Taipei to Canberra. Increasingly, events in one region ripple rapidly across the entire international system. For much of the post Cold War era, many assumed that globalization would make the world more prosperous and perhaps even more stable. What we're seeing today may be the opposite. A world that is more connected than ever, but also more vulnerable to disruption than at any time in recent memory. Whether this proves to be a temporary period of turbulence or the beginning of a fundamentally new international order remains to be seen. But one thing seems increasingly clear. The assumptions that shaped the last 30 years no longer seem sufficient for understanding the next 30. Now, on to questions for our audience. Do you believe the world is becoming more dangerous than it was a decade ago, or are we simply seeing threats more clearly because of technology and media? Which challenge worries you most? The Iran war, US China rivalry, Russia's war in Ukraine, or the growing instability in global energy markets? Are we witnessing the end of the post-Cold War era and the beginning of a new age of great power competition? Or is this simply just another period of turbulence that the international system will eventually absorb? Let us know in the comments section below. My thanks to the producers of The Focus, Neil Smart and Lynn Sear, and to our audience, thank you for being part of the conversation. Until next time, I'm John Bruni. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay focused.